Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're wading through, well, a mountain of material, all centered on the 80th United Nations General Assembly happening right now in New York.
It's a pretty big moment.
Definitely. Our mission here is to, quickly pull together the key threads, the diplomatic urgency, the really deep conflicts playing out, and also some of those surprising cultural and tech details that sort of define where we are right now.
And it is the UN's 80th anniversary. So you've got leaders from all 193 member states there for the General Assembly session. The official theme they picked is better together.
Better together. Looking through our sources, that feels, well, maybe less like a statement of fact and more like a hope. Maybe even a desperate plea.
I think that's fair. UN officials themselves sound really concerned.
Profoundly worried is the sense I get.
Absolutely. Secretary General António Guterres, he gave this remarkably bleak assessment, said the UN's founding principles are under assault as never before. Strong words.
Wow, he wasn't vague, was he? He pointed fingers.
No, he cited specific examples. Places where international law is being trampled, civilians targeted. Gaza, Ukraine, and Sudan were the main ones he highlighted.
And beyond those immediate, violent conflicts, you've got these huge grinding issues. Rising poverty, hunger.
Yeah, and all of that happening against the backdrop of, well, climate chaos.
Yeah.
The fires, the floods, record heat. It's constant in the news, isn't it?
It really is. Makes for a pretty somber environment for what's usually this 6-day marathon of speeches.
That speech fest, as you called it, it's got its own rhythm, too. Brazil always leads off the debate.
Oh, right, that tradition. Why is that again?
It goes back decades. Apparently back when the UN started, no one else volunteered to go first, so Brazil stepped up, and they've just kept doing it.
Yeah, interesting. And the speaker list this year, it's heavy. You've got leaders who maybe challenge that whole better together idea.
Yeah.
U.S. President Donald Trump is back at the rostrum.
Yeah, alongside Turkey's Erdogan, France's Macron, Jordan's King Abdullah II. Quite a lineup. About 89 heads of state, 43 heads of government listed so far.
Trump's presence, though, that immediately brings that tension to the surface, doesn't it?
It really does. You think back to his administration's America First stance, pulling funding from some UN bodies, slashing direct aid.
Right.
So his return really puts that better together theme in direct contrast with a very different sort of unilateral approach to how the world should work.
Okay, so if we're talking core tension, maybe multilateralism versus unilateralism, that seems to have defined the opening days, especially around the crisis that just, well, it's all the oxygen in the room.
You mean Gaza?
Yeah, the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Absolutely. It dominated. The sources talk about this high-level conference specifically focused on the peaceful settlement for Palestinians, implementing the two-state solution.
Co-chaired by France and Saudi Arabia, I saw.
Exactly. And it wasn't just talk. It felt like a real push to spur some international action.
And you can see that pressure building in the sources, can't you? This cascade of countries recognizing a Palestinian state.
Yeah. Several EU countries just recently, France, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, Monaco.
And that's after the UK, Canada, Australia, Portugal had already done so earlier.
The scale is what's striking. We're talking, around 3/4 of the UN's 193 members now recognize a Palestinian state?
That's huge. A massive global consensus kind of forming almost outside the control of the main players involved.
But, and here's the big but, that consensus hits a wall.
The boycott.
Right. Israel and the U.S. boycotted that two-state solution event completely.
So you have this huge global majority pushing one way and then this major diplomatic gap. Is that boycott? I mean, is it sustainable long-term against that kind of consensus? Or just delaying things?
Well, the reasoning given, according to the sources from the U.S. and Israeli side, is that this international push effectively rewards Hamas, which controls parts of Gaza.
Right. The argument is it makes getting a deal harder for the war, for hostages.
Exactly. Whether it's viable long-term, that's the big question. But right now, it's a powerful signal that a significant bloc, led by the U.S. and Israel, is essentially opting out of that particular diplomatic track.
And that tension doesn't stay contained at the UN, does it? It spills over, like that Italian workers' strike mentioned in the sources.
Yeah, held specifically in solidarity with Gaza. Caused disruptions across Italy. It just shows how connected everything is, emotionally, politically.
Absolutely. Okay, let's pivot slightly, but maybe stick with that theme of unilateral versus multilateral actions.
Yeah.
What about other geopolitical hotspots?
Well, Ukraine is still obviously a major focus. President Zelensky is there looking for intense diplomacy, trying to shore up support.
And on the nuclear front? Anything there?
Actually, yeah, a little nugget from Russian President Putin stated Russia is willing to abide by the nuclear arms deal with the U.S., but only for 1 year after it expires.
Hmm, okay. A small extension, maybe a tiny crack of potential cooperation in a very tense relationship.
A very tiny crack, perhaps. But now, let's bring that theme of power, maybe unilateral power, back to the U.S. domestic scene, because some big things are happening there concurrently with the UN meeting.
Like the Supreme Court case.
Exactly. The Supreme Court is set to weigh potentially expanding presidential power big time by possibly overturning a really old foundational ruling.
Okay, that sounds technical, but break it down. Why does overturning a 90-year-old ruling matter to someone listening globally? Which ruling is it?
It's about something called Chevron deference. Basically, for decades, if Congress wrote a somewhat vague law, the courts usually deferred to the expertise of the federal agency, like the EPA or FDA, if their interpretation was reasonable.
Got it. So the experts at the agency got to fill in the details.
Pretty much. Overturning it could mean, well, either Congress has to write incredibly specific laws, which is hard.
Or the courts step in more.
Or the president. Or the president and the executive branch gain significantly more power to shape regulations and bypass those agencies. More unilateral power domestically.
And if a U.S. president has more unchecked power at home?
It likely changes how they operate internationally. Think trade deals, climate agreements being discussed at the UN. It connects.
Puts that America First idea into the mechanics of government itself.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of the administration, there were other policy claims grabbing headlines too.
Yeah, the sources mentioned the administration raising concerns, described as unfounded, linking vaccines, Tylenol, and autism, repeating discredited claims.
Okay. And connecting back to priorities, that California high-speed rail money.
Right. The administration plans to hand back $2.4 billion it previously took away from California's project.
So while the world's talking cooperation, climate investment, the focus here is on a very specific domestic political choice about infrastructure funding.
It's a clear example of that unilateral focus, prioritizing specific domestic maneuvers, perhaps over those broader long-term commitments the UN is calling for.
Okay, so we've got wars, major diplomatic divides, internal power struggles in the U.S. But the world isn't just presidents and courts, is it? Where's the money, the attention, the human capital actually going?
And this is where we get into those other nuggets from the sources, the details that show the world's maybe fragmented attention span, kind of distracting from that big, better together theme.
Let's start with tech and business. Big shifts there, too. Google's facing another attempt to break it up.
Yeah, after being found guilty of anti-competitive ad practices, that's a massive global antitrust battle playing out right alongside the UN summit.
And government intervention in business, too. U.S. Steel.
Right. The White House actually stepped in, blocked U.S. Steel from stopping steel processing at an Illinois plant, a very direct move to protect domestic jobs.
Meanwhile, the whole TikTok saga continues.
Yep. The algorithm is going to be licensed to a U.S. joint venture. Oracle and Silver Lake are leading it. It's this incredibly complex, multi-billion-dollar arrangement trying to balance business with national security concerns.
It's amazing how these huge, complex corporate and political deals have to share the news cycle with acts of, well, pure philanthropy, like MacKenzie Scott's donation.
Oh, yeah, $70 million to the UNCF.
That's the United Negro College Fund, a huge investment.
Massive. Focused on strengthening historically black colleges and universities, HBCUs, a major domestic investment in education and equity, and it's running in the same news feeds as Guterres warning about global collapse. It's quite the juxtaposition.
Okay, shifting gears again, science and climate, even our personal choices are becoming part of this global narrative now.
Well, on the aspirational side, NASA introduced 10 new astronauts chosen from over 8,000 applicants, still that drive to explore.
But on the climate side, it's getting personal.
Apparently so. A study mentioned in the sources suggests people often miscalculate their own climate impact. And the one surprise they highlighted.
Let me guess. Flying, eating meat.
Nope. Owning a dog.
Ew.
The significant, often overlooked environmental footprint of pet ownership.
Wow. Okay, so while leaders debate trillions for climate policy, part of the conversation is also suddenly about Fido.
Kind of puts things in perspective, doesn't it? And meanwhile, the actual consequences of climate change aren't waiting for any debate.
That super typhoon.
Yeah, hitting near the northern Philippines and Taiwan. Forcing evacuations, closures. Extreme weather isn't a future threat. It's happening now.
So add extreme weather, pets, antitrust, domestic power, grabs to the list. That's the fragmented reality we're talking about.
Which brings us, I guess, to our oddities corner. Those little cultural details that maybe say something about us when we're not focused on the big crises.
Like Ghana's fantasy coffins. I saw those mentioned.
Yeah, they're getting global attention. These incredibly vibrant, artistic coffins shaped like things important to the person's life. It's framed as this amazing celebration of life and legacy.
Going beyond just burial into something really rich culturally.
And then totally different vibe, these giant trolls.
Yeah, what's that about?
They've been created and placed around the world, apparently with this specific message for humans about, protecting the planet. Creative, a bit quirky, but with a serious environmental plea.
Art with a message. And finally, a historical footnote. Finland's Air Force flags.
Oh, right, the swastikas. Still lingering on some flags, apparently a historical thing, not related to Nazism in their context, but...
But definitely on the way out, the sources said.
Yes, confirmed they are being phased out. Just one of those weird historical quirks that persist.
So let's try and synthesize all this. We've got the 80th UNGA theme, Better Together. But everything we're seeing points to a world fractured, often by deliberate choice.
Absolutely. You see this huge multilateral consensus, like on Palestinian statehood, running smack into a powerful unilateral boycott by the U.S. and Israel.
You see presidential power potentially being reshaped dramatically back home in the U.S. via the courts.
While simultaneously, the administration is making these very specific claims about public health or moving infrastructure funds based on domestic politics.
The big diplomatic machinery is definitely running at the UN, but it feels like everyone's attention, the money, the focus, it's constantly being pulled away.
Pulled by these competing crises, yes, but also by trillion-dollar tech fights, by philanthropy, even by surprising climate calculations about pets.
So thinking about all those challenges the Secretary General laid out, war, poverty, climate chaos, what really strikes you about those other stories we found? That $70 million for HBCUs, or Ghana's fantasy coffins, they're sharing the same space, the same news feeds as these existential global warnings.
It really highlights how incredibly messy and, fractured our collective attention is, doesn't it? Even as leaders gather for these critical talks, the conversation immediately fragments.
Yeah, it shifts to how presidential power works because of a court case about Chevron deference, or to something as seemingly small but apparently significant as whether owning a dog is a major climate choice.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. Looking at all these threads, the high-stakes diplomacy, the massive tech shifts, the deep domestic policy battles, the cultural quirks, the personal lifestyle choices, which of these seemingly disparate things do you think will actually have the most defining impact on our world by the time the UN gathers for its next big anniversary?
Something to reflect on. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.